Seven on Sundays podcast is intended for mature audiences. Episodes discuss sensitive and fraught topics that many teens and 20-somethings face, but may be triggering. The content may not be suitable for all audience members. Please take caution when listening.
When I was 15 and I had lost my virginity, I remember I felt like I was mature enough to have sex, yet I was still scared of it, considering what I thought it was and what it looked like. I kind of had this view of there was movie sex and then there was like real sex that was on porn. And I was prepared to have kind of movie sex, which is soft and sensual and whatnot, but I wasn't yet ready to have real sex.
Hello and welcome to Seven on Sundays, the podcast about how young adults are navigating sex, relationships, and life today.
We are your hosts, Dr. Shez Leby and Stephanie Boy, and each week we will share our candid conversations with young adults and experts about today's tough topics.
We are excited today to talk to Anne. It's a pseudonym. And I have to say, I really love when I talk to a young person who is very clear and honest and articulate about the impact that pornography made on their life. And this is literally echoed dozens of times a year to me from the high school, college, or post-grad students that I speak to. And unlike an older generation, they actually feel the impact of porn more profoundly and acutely. And the reason is that their exposure comes during an essential period of brain development. And it's at a time when they're experiencing their primary relationships as well. So it becomes very confusing for them. Most of these kids literally have no one to talk to because their parents are either unapproachable or don't understand pornography today. And a lot of parents, from what I hear from kids, also think that they're lucky that they have easily accessible pornography where their parents didn't. So I think they just don't understand. I'm going to link a study from a website called Your Brain on Porn, which was begun by the amazing and recently passed Gary Wilson and his wife, Marnia. I love them. But on there, they have research that shows reports that 18 to 30-year-old group reported the highest mean of deviant sexual fantasy, which means that they are the ones who grew up on tube sites and also report the highest rates of fantasizing about rape, fetishism, and sex with children. This is very disturbing. And though Anne doesn't say what type of porn she escalated into really, she does acknowledge that she started watching things that shamed her and made her feel horrible. So this is what happens when your brain has habituated pornography. The reason that it's different also is because these are kids that have increased pornography consumption more than their peers that are our generation. And it's also more socially acceptable than it ever was in any previous generation. So it's definitely a different beast as we see the impact on young people versus those in their, say, 40s and 50s and above.
You know, I love the Gary Wilson research. And one of the things that struck me is that they found that 3/4 of teenagers admitted to viewing pornography by the age 17, and 60% say they stumbled upon it by accident. I can tell you from personal experience, one of my children had to do a report on the White House. And he looked up the White House and a porn site came up. And this is back in, 2000 and whatever. So Anne helps us see how easy that is. And this is probably one of the most pivotal and important podcasts that we've done. When the brain is exposed to porn very young like that, at that impressionable, vulnerable age, that affects everything from mental health to sexuality to cognitive. The research shows it even affects cognition and cognitive mental capacity. So this is really important. We can no longer bury our heads in the sand and think, my kid's not watching that, because the reality of what Anne shares, unfortunately, is that males and female children are definitely exposed to it. And what I really want to share that's interesting is the way this escalates from, a video game to YouTube to porn to things called family porn. How many of our listening audience as parents or young adults know what family porn is. We need to know what that is, and we need to be aware of the damaging effects that those kind of things can do for people. So thank you, Anne. I These stakes are so high, and I am so appreciative of her courage. It was a great interview, Steph. Your knowledge is just killer in this area. So please listen in, and thanks for joining.
My relationship with porn is complicated and not normal with other girls my age, I believe. I had a very early curiosity, I would say around 6 or 7, in just adult relationships and how they worked. My parents divorced before I could remember, so I would start asking friends about, what their parents' relationships were, and then I'd hear from sitcoms or TV shows this word sex, and all those questions and everything just off this curiosity. So initially, when I would say I was about 8 years old, I go onto YouTube before it was censored like it is today, and I would research videos about sex and eventually discovered this thing called pornography, and that I could look it up on the internet just as I could with YouTube. So the first time I looked up porn, I think I was 9 years old. And also around that time period, there was a trend of YouTubers going on Omegle, which wasn't a website for kids. It had a lot of adult exposure, mainly just penises. So websites like that and learning about researching pornography for the first time on my own, I was exposed to a lot. And from the ages of about 10 to 13, I continued using pornography as like a sexual dictionary, and also to gain arousal from it. I was going through puberty and learning about my sexuality for the first time and learning about what my body could do. So I would use porn as my point of reference of, you know what is sex, what is masturbation, what it looks like and what it should look like, really, to the point where I became the person in my friend group that knew everything about relationships and sex. I became the person that they started seeking advice from. And when I was about 14, I started masturbating, and I felt like I needed to watch porn in order to get aroused and in order to successfully masturbate, because that's what other people were doing. That's what boys did. So it started off from a rough point. And then when I was 15 and I had lost my virginity, I remember I felt like I was mature enough to have sex, yet I was still scared of it, considering what I thought it was and what it looked like. I kind of had this view of there was movie sex and then there was like real sex that was on porn. And I was prepared to have kind of movie sex, which is soft and sensual and whatnot, but I wasn't yet ready to have real sex, the thing that I thought everyone was doing. And eventually, my boyfriend at that time that I was, you know, giving my virginity to, eventually we would go into more of the scary things, and they became less scary and they became arousing, because finally I'm watching this porn and I feel like I can relate to it, and it gets even more arousing. We would try a bunch of different things together and just explore together, and a lot of these things that I was scared of before became arousing. And I believe it was because of just the way I viewed how I viewed porn and how it became my point of reference.
So when you first kind of got exposed to porn, it was on YouTube. And did you like Google the word sex, or like how quickly and easily did you get to that is my first question.
When I started looking on YouTube, if you're familiar with the Sims games, Sims 1, 2, 3, I used to
Yes.
play that as a kid. And so I would search up sim sex or sim woohoo. And that was there are specific modifications you can put on the game to make it appear as though like real sex. It was basically porn, but these Sims characters. And then from there, it kind of escalated to how to have sex, what does sex look like, sex positions. And once I felt like I had cycled through, everything that there was, that's when I went to porn to kind of expand my horizon. And that was, very, very different.
Did you have a phone like in your room or a computer in your room? Like, how were you accessing these things?
When I was about that age, I had a tablet that could access the internet. And then when I got my first phone when I was 10 years old, because I started staying home alone. And once I had my phone, I could, look it up wherever, whenever. And if I could do it on a private tab, and my parents would never know about it.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, of course. Forgot to sort of mention that within the age range or the time period where I was the friend that knew everything about relationships and sex because I was looking this stuff up, that was also around the same period where I started questioning my sexuality. And, today, present day, I identify as bisexual, but, earlier days, I didn't think I was at all attracted to men because of the way it was viewed in porn. Men were just aggressive, the sex was aggressive, and it was really unattractive and scary and unappealing. But looking at like lesbian porn, it seemed more like the movie sex that I was talking about, where it's sensual and it's slow. It just felt safer. So I thought for a while, like maybe I'm just into women. I didn't know what my sexuality was for years because I kept bouncing between, well, am I a lesbian? Am I straight? Am I bisexual? And it just kind of confused it all because porn is telling me one thing, but television shows are telling me another thing. And then my real life experiences were, completely different. They were all just kind of counteracting each other, if that makes sense. I don't know, does that make sense?
Absolutely, that makes a ton of sense. It's very confusing for a lot of people. Actually, if you go on Reddit, there are a lot of subreddits about people who have what happens is you escalate, or because you're bored, you start to look at different kinds of porn, and then, porn is doing its job. Porn is there to arouse you. That's the job of porn. That's the job of erotica. If it's not doing it, it's not going to get trending in any way, right? So it's arousing you, but it's arousing you to sexual kind of kinks and templates that may not be in alignment with where your natural inclination or your natural sexual preferences might be. You know what I mean? Your sexual identity. So it is confusing for a lot of people, and it can cause a lot of serious psychological trauma because people are questioning, do I like trans people? Am I gay? And it doesn't seem to be in alignment with their natural inclinations, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no,
I'm
that
sure it makes sense
absolutely
to
does
you.
make sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
As a young person, with your brain developing, your body developing, your sexuality and sexual interest developing, like all this fast-paced development happening, that becomes all consuming in terms of informing all of that development, because you haven't had any other experiences. So this is kind of your first introduction, and then also it's continuing to shape things, including your arousal and everything post that.
And do you recall the feeling that you had the first time you saw pornography, actual pornography? Do you recall the emotion and the response you had to it?
I can't remember specifically, but I vaguely remember just complete and utter shock.
Was that
Th-
shock in oh my God, I found this stuff? Or was it shock in like, wow, I had no idea this is what it was? This is what sex looked like?
I think it was, wow, I had no idea this is what it was because I had been doing the like slight research on YouTube, and that was way tamer than pornography. And so then actually seeing pornography, I was just kind of like, wow, this doesn't look fun. Even though people talk about it being fun, I was like, this doesn't look fun. This doesn't look pleasurable. But I guess it is, since people say it is. So I guess it was just kind of shocked that, wow, this is it. This is that thing.
Right. So, and Dr. Shez can talk about this, but I think our bodies and our brains are disconnected, right? Because we feel aroused, like I said, because that's the job of pornography. Actually, they've done studies that, and this is what they used to use in cases against women who had been raped, to use against them, saying that they wanted to, like they used to say, and pardon the graphic, but like she was wet. Our body, I'm going to remember the term in a second, but your body and your brain are disconnected. Your body can be ready for sex even though your brain doesn't want to have sex, if that makes sense. So you have that same disconnect when you see something that's arousing, because your body's responding to the arousal, but your brain is saying that doesn't look enjoyable, that looks painful, that looks aggressive, that looks whatever. And it's very hard for our brains to be able to figure that out, to contextualize what's happening, especially when you're young. Maybe Dr. Shez can put that a little more eloquently.
I think you're speaking perfectly, Steph, to what's happening. I think that the dissonance that happens with watching something that is violent, which we naturally kind of repel from. We maybe want to see it, but then we don't want to see it, but then we don't. And then the, body responding in a way that is not in our control because it is titillating like it's supposed to be, as you said. So I think it's a dissonance that happens, and the problem for me as a psychotherapist is that does induce trauma, and that does also further it when there isn't a place to process, because it's so taboo to talk about these things. And we're opening this platform, but there are very few people, that women in particular, that talk about watching porn at any age, never mind, younger age, but we just don't talk about it. So then there's not this place to process. So that kind of furthers the dissonance, furthers the, lack of true education of what is in between the movie sex and or porn, and what is reality for each and every one of us. And then also kind of processing that trauma of viewing something violent, maybe you did, and also just shocking, as you said, that it's like, wait, this is what it is, and there's no place to process that.
She actually said a couple of things that were dissonance, right? Because like
Yes.
one is like you said, when you first saw the aggressiveness and the violence, or the how it had amped up in pornography versus like what you saw on YouTube, you said that it scared you. And it wasn't until you were with your boyfriend that you started to re-examine the way that you felt about it, or you felt like it wasn't as scary. And I don't know that that's necessarily true, that it's not as scary. I mean, I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about that. But see, here again is the disconnect or the dissonance between what you saw and then your experience of it, and then what you saw, like, violence wise, but then also how you saw lesbian relationships, as it's portrayed in pornography, seems soft and more consensual, less aggressive. And then you went toward that. Porn really did inform a lot of the way you felt about sex, what you were willing to accept, it sounds like. Would you say that that's true?
Yeah, I would say that that's true, especially thinking about, the having sex for the first time with my first boyfriend. By the time we decided to have sex, I was viewing porn and masturbating, and, all the straight porn, mainstream, whatever, had become arousing, and I had, found arousal in it. But I was still scared to kind of imitate what was in those videos,
Mhm.
because I don't know honestly why. I knew I found it arousing viewing it, but I didn't want to participate.
Do you think that a lot of females, or have you talked to enough other girls to see how they feel about pornography if they've seen it? Kind of the statistic is that 30% of habitual porn watchers or users are female. And that's also the statistic of really how many girls versus guys once you get to college age have watched porn enough without it being habitual, but like have seen porn. It's definitely a less number of females, but I I would be interested to hear if you have ever had a discussion with girls about how they felt, and did they feel the same way about the first time they saw porn, that it was aggressive or it scared them from having those types of sexual relationships with guys.
Yeah, I had one very close friend in high school, and we would talk about things like sex together because we were both starting to have sex around the same time. And her and I's experience with our exposure to porn and being curious about it was pretty similar.
Mhm.
And she was always, turned on by it and ready to imitate that in the bedroom and wanted that from a partner, those more aggressive acts
Mhm.
versus my friends who don't really watch porn. If they have seen it, they aren't turned on by it. They don't want to see any more of it. They get the shock of, holy cow, this is a lot, and they don't want to watch it anymore. Or the friends that haven't watched any more of it. And from what they've shared about their experiences with their partners and having sex, it seems to be way more pleasurable, not as aggressive, not as crazy. I think it's like what a lot of people would call vanilla, but it was doing what they wanted. It was doing what it needed to do without the aggressive nature versus my one friend who had a similar exposure to porn. She was into the aggressive nature.
Clearly there's always been a portion of the population that is into BDSM or rough sex, if we differentiate the two. But it's been a small niche. It's like a kink. It's not been something that is widely accepted. On August 2019, there was a Sunday Times data review. They did a study, research on rough sex and favorite porn categories. So rough sex for under 22 was something that 42% of those under 22 liked. And let me just point out that sex online came out around 2005, which means it's about 20 years. So if you look at people under the age of 22, that's their entire sexual development age, right? 42% of them like rough sex. Of those 22 to 38, again, also almost a majority of their sexual development years, porn has been readily available online, 29% of them. And for those who are 39 to 54, the percentage who like rough sex is 18%. So it is almost double in your age bracket versus my age bracket. And the difference, like it's exponentially higher since porn was online. So we can't say that it's, what is it, causality, Shez?
Yeah.
But it seems to indicate that since rough sex has been portrayed online in porn, there has been an increasing acceptance and desire for it.
And let's just say this, it's not even in porn. You and I have talked a lot about it's in mainstream music, it's in, music videos, it's kind of hinted at innuendo in ads in magazines sometimes, so it's enculturated. And the problem is that it becomes this conditioning thing, which is, I think, Anne, what happened to you is just as you're entering your sexuality, your interest, your development, all these things are conditioning you and desensitizing you. That's another piece of it, is we get desensitized to the shock. The shock is there initially, and the more that you are exposed to all these things, it becomes desensitizing and at the same time arousing. So it's a, again, multifaceted kind of issue. But I think that those statistics, Steph, are shocking because yes, you and I did not even fathom anything more than the movie sex that you're talking about. And I love the way you describe that, Anne, because talk about dissonance, that it's kind of like the Santa Claus thing. Like, was everybody lying to you and to me and to everybody the whole time? If that's your experience, that like, wow, I'm watching these movies with these loving romantic things. And then, oh, is this what it is? Just like, again, the Santa thing. So that does a number on how we relate to people and how we relate to ourselves and what our expectations are.
To your point, Shez, last night I was watching The Bachelor. It was sponsored by KFC. Couldn't be more Americana than KFC. The advertisement that they used said, "Do you want to slam?" Which is, by
Yes.
the way, street slang for rough sex or for getting banged. It's all of these rough terminology words that we use to describe sex, not like we used to. Now it's like she got nailed, she got slammed, she got banged, all of these things that are rough. I was like, even KFC is using this. And it was like, "Do you want to get slammed?" But I was like, that's disgusting that even our most Americana brands are using rough sex porn terminology, if you will, street slang sex, in order to sell a bucket of frickin' Kentucky Fried Chicken. So anyway, Anne.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, definitely. One thing that I have been thinking about is just, with like lyrics in rap songs and just hearing that down the hallways of like high school or whatnot, just all these guys, the way they talk about sex and like banging and fucking and slamming and smashing, like smash or pass, if you guys are familiar with.
About whether a girl's worthy of smashing or you'd pass on her.
Yes, exactly. And it's like a game, and it's even like a TikTok trend. You like put up celebrity crushes or, honestly just random figures and you say smash or pass. Even that terminology is aggressive. And I remember guys would guys are in middle school and high school were always publicly talking about smashing and banging and having sex. But girls were never talking about it like that.
I'm so glad that you said that. It's really important for us to remember that this is most people before all of this indoctrination, if you will, this is not the way we as even humans look at another person when we want to be with them sexually. This is a creation, a man-made creation, a porn-made creation to sell. This is literally like nothing different than cigarettes. They reel you in, and then you just get, you don't start out smoking 10 cigarettes a day. You start with one cigarette. They put an addictive quality in it so that the next time you want 2 cigarettes and then 3 cigarettes. So porn has created this narrative that is not reflective of our innate human response to somebody that we like. And I think you can see that in the difference between females who have been less influenced by porn versus young men who unfortunately have seen it and they don't understand, because a porn star's not doing her job if she's not responding with absolute pleasure to being gagged, to being choked, to being all sorts of dehumanization that happens to her in porn. She's not a porn star. So that leaves the regular girl no choice but to, well, there are a lot of choices. I don't want to say there's no choice. I'm saying if you follow what is expected of you through a porn script, that is the way you need to respond to anything, whether it's pleasurable or not.
I was just thinking that made me remember the first time I really stopped looking at porn as something to get pleasure from, something regular, is when major porn star, Mia Khalifa, she went on different social media platforms, I think TikTok and Twitter and whatnot, and she was trying to get her old porn videos off of, you know, big major porn websites such as Pornhub because she had, been a porn star for a few months when she was really young, got a lot of hate from her family and her community, and then went back and tried to get those videos off those websites, but they had trapped her in a certain contract, and the entire situation was unjust, and she, I think, is still fighting to get those videos taken down somehow legally. And it's not that she isn't a sex worker anymore, she's now on OnlyFans, but the way she talked about her experiences, it was, you have to look this way. Okay, now we're going to tie you up and do this. And, nothing was really done with her consent. She was just told to do it. And that was the first time that I really started looking at porn in a disgusting way because I could no longer watch it without thinking of the woman in the video. And is she in this situation because she wants to be? Is she actually getting pleasure from this? Or is she just in this situation because there are outside, she needs to be financially stable on her own? She has a child to support or something. So I remember that porn star speaking out
So I
started.
can tell you, Anne, I have interviewed, worked with, consider people that are very close to my heart that have been in sex work. I have a big heart for them. I don't know that I could say that we're like close friends, but I have no judgment or disdain for them, and I really have a lot of compassion for where they've come from. And I can tell you, in fact, probably when we do the opening for this, I will read the letter from CC. Either that or I will redistribute the interview I did with a porn star named CC on this platform. You can look for it because Dr. Shez and I will discuss this interview that I did because it's really powerful. And you are absolutely 100% correct. They are not enjoying it. They are treated horribly. We don't need to really go into it now because I'm going to do a whole show on that. I think it's really important. But I think what you're talking about, they started or they're trying to create a law called the right to be forgotten because so many young women are literally trafficked. I think probably in pornography, I would say at least 85% of all people that are in pornography are trafficked in one form or another. A lot of them don't understand what trafficking is, but that is true.
Women and men, or just women?
Women and
The
men. Yep,
5%.
women and
Women
men.
and men. Okay,
It's
thank you.
capitalizing and financial gain through force, fraud, or coercion. That sex acts where somebody is making money off of a sex act through force, fraud, or coercion, and exactly what you're talking about. And where they may not have a roof over their head, they may be a drug addict and need their fix. And the porn set is giving them a fix of drugs. They will never admit that, but that happens. But there's a whole different, like, we'll go into that on a different show, but you are absolutely 100% correct. And if you look into it, there's no way, if you are a feminist or you care about women, that you can look at porn the same way ever again. But I have some questions. Going away from that, not that it's not important, it is, but it's a different story. I have a question about, do you feel in watching porn, did it cause you to have an escalation? Like, did you start out watching some things and then find yourself watching other porn that was more aggressive, or something that you thought, I will never watch that type of porn, and then you were?
Yeah, definitely. Like, using lesbian porn as an example, it was the first thing that I was comfortable with watching on those websites. And I remember scrolling past and seeing like family porn, like stepson, stepmother, whatnot. And that was disgusting to me. I didn't think I'd ever watch that. But then watching lesbian porn, there's stepmom, stepdaughter, and that led me to watch some of the family porn, and something I was disgusted by, something I didn't think I would ever watch. And like when I did watch those videos, I'd have to skip through the part whenever they'd say, oh, stepmom or stepdaughter, anything reference the fact that they're family, because it was so gross to me. But eventually I did like become curious, and I was watching these intros just to see this dynamic and how, like, how do people get off or fantasize about this? So, like, then I started watching, the entire intros of things, of those kinds of videos, because it was just so shocking to me. I think that might have been the most shocking thing out of all of the videos on porn.
Thank you for sharing that, because that is true. And escalation is something that a lot of people don't like to talk about because it's embarrassing for some people and it feels really vulnerable that you feel, I don't know, bad that this happened. But like understanding how pornography works is really important, and maybe you can help somebody understand what happens when you go on a porn website. You're fed 30 thumbnails, right? And
Mhm.
of those thumbnails, there may be one thing that you're looking for, but of those 30, there's a lot of gangbang, there's a lot of incest porn, there's a lot of amateur. And amateur is a code for young, vulnerable girls. That's what it is. And there's a lot of violence in the terms. Like I remember the terms, not the terms, sorry, the titles. I remember I wrote down for my class at the College of Charleston, I wrote down the titles of a lot of porn because the titles alone turned my stomach. They were literally hard for me to even repeat in class. So does that ring true to you? Do you feel like that is the way that they sort of subtly get you in there? Like it's there in front of your face when you go on Pornhub.
Yeah, definitely. And, it is a little bit embarrassing to admit, but I remember, I don't know how old I was. There was this one video and it had a disgusting title of like uncle slams niece, something along those lines. But it was so disgusting to me that I had to click on it and just see what it was. And then, I found arousal in it. And it was just very confusing to kind of see that. And, like my brain is disgusted, but my body is aroused. That what's the word?
Dissonance.
Dissonance, yes, that we were talking about. I
Mhm.
remember that video specifically being disgusted with myself, but also not entirely, disliking it.
Thank you for your honesty with that. And I want to let you know you are not alone in that. What with the child sexual abuse survivors that I work with, it is so common, and it's almost and always that there is this confusion and dissonance about the fact that, a person might say, I was abused, and this comes up in court too, as you kind of mentioned before, Steph. I was abused and I knew I didn't want this. I knew it was either they'll say wrong or hurtful or not okay, but yet my body responded. And I think it's so important for people to realize that doesn't mean that somebody wants it just because your body is doing the natural response to something that you might be curious about, or you might be confused about, or you might be, again, kind of have your attention because it's so novel and shocking. And it's I want to look, but I don't, or I want to do this, but then I don't, it's all of that. And that doesn't mean that anybody can abuse anybody or that anybody wants that. But that's what happens because we're not informed enough to say that. So thank you for sharing that dissonance that you experienced, because that is exactly what happens, a lot of times in sexual abuse cases in particular. But with this porn situation, for sure, because again, you don't have a place to process necessarily. I know you had a friend, but to be able to process, like, what is this and how do I reality check, and what am I experiencing and feeling versus what I'm seeing, all those kind of things.
And there's a lot of shame.
Yes.
Shame.
Yes,
Shame
you
is
express
such
that.
a hard cycle to get out of, right? And adults don't know how to talk about it. A lot of parents don't know how to talk about it. And this is why it's important to have these discussions, because let's just say you are my child and you feel this way. I would hope that you would come to me and I would say, I just want you to understand your body from your brain, and it doesn't, because your body responds a certain way. And this is whether you've been abused or whether you've seen porn, which I consider a form of abuse. And I have to also point out young men, because erections are such a clear sign of arousal and so confusing. Like for girls, it's we get aroused, but we can almost lie to ourselves and be like, oh, I wasn't aroused, right? Like, because what, I got wet, or I got, like a little horny. A boy can't. And it's so, like, I think disturbing and hard for them, because it's such a clear reality that this was arousing to me. And I think for young men who have been abused, and I want to bring in abuse here because I do think porn is abuse. I think abuse and pornography both create that real shame in young men, also in young women. It's across the board, and non-binary folk. It's very confusing, because the truth of the matter is our sexuality is supposed to develop like a flower, right? And there's a great film called Raised on Porn, and it's by Magic Lantern Films. And the doctor, I can't remember what his name is, psychologist on there, he explains it like a flower. He said, when I was young, I would see these flowers. I would see flowers in bloom, and I would see buds. And I wanted to see the buds in bloom, and I would pull them apart, but the leaves would fall off. The petals would fall off. And he's like, that's sort of like sexuality. Sexuality has to bloom and blossom like a flower in its time. When you pull it apart, it damages the petals. And in that way, when we expose ourselves to sexually explicit material before our bodies are ready for it, our brains, let's just say our brains are ready for it, we harm our sexual development. And I think that's important, because you said something about the first time you had sex at 15 or 14, you thought you were ready. I don't know if I have the age wrong. You thought you were ready. And what you thought you were ready for was physically you were ready because you were horny, because you saw porn, right? Any one of us could say that. But my big contention on kids in high school is our bodies might be ready, but our brains aren't ready for that level of emotional commitment. And when you add in something that can be sexually traumatizing, like aggressive, violent sex, you are definitely not emotionally ready for that. Like, it's just a hot mess of something that's going to lead to a lot of problems down the road.
When I lost my virginity, it wasn't a planned out kind of thing. I feel like a lot of friends my age, they would talk it out with their boyfriends and plan ahead to when they wanted to have sex together for the first time.
Mhm.
But with me and my boyfriend, it was just, I felt like I had been ready for a while, but I just wanted to give it more time into our relationship and make sure it was like give us a solid foundation. And once I felt like we had surpassed that, I mean, we were just making out, heavy petting, whatnot. And then I said, I think I'm ready right now for us to do this. Simply, and I think it resonates, that I think I was just horny, in that moment. I was like, all right, let's just do it. Like,
So this is, I have to ask this, because most young women, you have to explore and learn about your body in order to have an orgasm. So you're horny, you decide that, okay, we're going to have sex now. Was it even sexually gratifying, or was it like a letdown? Because, like, I think there's this idea that you're going to have this sex and you're going to have the same sexual response or an orgasm like the girl in pornography. And I think, sadly, when our instructor is someone in porn and not our partner, saying that feels good, keep doing that, I really like that, maybe try this, move over here. Like, if your motivator is the porn actress, that has nothing to do with the body that you're with. Like, your partner's body, especially if it's female, is vastly different than another female. And porn is not realistic to begin with. So did you find that even though you were aroused and horny, was it worth it?
no, I remember it hurting a lot. And I had expected to hurt maybe for the first few minutes. I felt like, my body just had to like get used to specifically, his penis inside me. I thought I just had to get used to it and then it would start feeling good, but it didn't feel good for the first time, not even the second time, not even the third time, not until like the fourth time we did it start feeling good and arousing. So it was kind of just, that first moment, it was like a lot of pent up emotion of, us making out, heavy petting, building up to the moment, and then all of a sudden, stop. Now let's try this. And then it was just an awkward kind of dance of like, okay, do I do it this way? Should I do it this way? Like, are you comfortable? No, I'm not really comfortable. Well, what can I do to make it better? And it's like, I don't really know. It just kind of became awkward. And yeah, it was kind of just a upward hill and then a steep drop.
What I love, Anne, about what you're saying, and it's, I don't want to love anything about this experience, but what I do love is you are an excellent communicator. So the fact that even in your high school youth, you had the forethought to communicate with your boyfriend in that way, that makes me really happy. So, your communication skills are excellent. What scares me is something you said before when you said, you know, I didn't know what it was supposed to be like. And then I saw this like rough porn and I thought, oh, this is what it's supposed to be. And I think that's something Stephanie and I both hear, a lot, that it's basically saying that pornography is the source of education for what it's supposed to be. And and then you get into reality and again, it's like, oh, shoot, this feels horrible, but at least you were communicating with how to maybe fix that, maybe more for him than for yourself, but I hope for both. But anyway, I think that's an important point too, is that what you're pointing to is from a very young age, and you are not alone, but from a very young age, the reality that parents must understand is that if we're not talking about it, people, our kids are going to Google and search, and pornography becomes the sex ed teacher.
I would just to kind of add to that, I think especially, right now in my discussions with my friends, I think it's, also moved on from not only just pornography anymore, but also erotica and smut. It's becoming like mainstream literature and I don't know, this is an entirely different topic of, just cutesy covers on top of erotica books. And it looks okay for maybe a middle schooler to pick up when the contents inside are not. But that's a completely different topic where I think young girls are also getting their sexual education from that as well.
I'm so glad you brought that up. Smut is huge.
Yeah,
Smut
huge.
is it's like a gateway drug, really.
Yeah.
It like you think it's like you're reading something, but it's funny. I interviewed a woman who did a study for New Zealand. She was one of the doctors on a study for New Zealand about pornography, and she was more upset. It literally made her cry when I interviewed her to talk about hentai porn versus regular porn because her thing was she said, you know what, Stephanie, you can do more to an animated child in a video than you can do to a real child in a video. You can't have a real child, but you can have a real child in hentai porn that, you know, makes the same sounds as a young girl, all of these things. And she's like, it was so deeply disturbing to me that this was so popular. And I think smut falls along those lines, and also what do you call graphic novels along the same line. It all falls under that category. And the bottom line again goes back to that flower motif. Our sexuality is not ready to be developed at that age. I did not think I was a child who was sexually abused by my kung fu teacher one time. I did think about sex when I was young because of abuse, and children who are abused will think about sex. But a child who is not abused will not think about those things until they reach 11, 12, and their body starts to change. And even then, they are not thinking about what's in pornography. So this is very disturbing because the messaging is so wrong. It's getting to kids so early. It is opening the door to intimacy and sexuality long before it naturally occurs. And what happens is, to what you said about your friends who had never seen porn, they were having sex with their boyfriends. They have studies that show people who are exposed to explicit material young have earlier first sexual experiences, and their normal sexual experiences are more risky than those who do not view sexually explicit material. And that seems to be true in your story. Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, I definitely do think that is accurate.
I mean, I'm just going to say it. Masturbation saves lives. You can learn your body. You don't have to have sex. In those moments, I know it's hard to say because you're like this young girl, but like if we normalize the fact that people get horny, young people get horny, if we had age, verification on porn so that you couldn't see it young, but when you are horny and young, you can also masturbate. It's really important to learn about your body first anyway.
Yeah, definitely. I think masturbation saved me a lot of wasted time in, like potential partners. Cause I just thought to myself, this person isn't worth it. I can do it myself.
Right. Right. I also think what you're saying, Steph, what you both are saying is kind of normalizing personal exploration and talking about these things versus, just kind of going on our own and finding things. And when you mentioned The Sims, like that too is so important. And I get worried, like I can't take on all the worries of the world, but I get worried about AI. That's going to feel real. And there are going to be ways out there that they are going to do AI that you are, if you're into it, having sex with a child, and it will feel as real that your brain thinks this is actually happening. And then what is that going to do to our, if it's if it's a young person's sexual development, but also what's that going to do to our whole sexual landscape? I don't know, but it's already there in these respects with those, with videos and anime and all that kind of stuff. And I think parents feel like, oh, it's just a video game, but that's really important that we talk about these things so that we all know, no, the video games, there's ratings for a reason, and they can even sneak it in, under the guise like a KFC commercial. Like that's crazy.
I'm
you
just
know
so scared about what you just said. That literally is a horrifying thought, that
Yeah.
AI is going to give someone the experience of having sex with a child.
Yes.
Yeah.
I can see that so easily happening, and it's probably already out there. Somebody's probably doing that, and it's all for money and for the next level. And so how do we prevent that? By really openly talking and banding together to say, this is damaging, guys. This is really not okay. Do you know the statistics on, I mean, of course, this is impossible to capture, but what are the numbers of children that anybody knows that they have research of children that have been exposed to porn?
Well, so that you can't really ask children.
I
No,
know.
most parents won't. But there is
Right.
there was a company called Bitdefender, and they did research on. So there's over 1 million porn websites out there, and
Right.
they hold like 1/3 or more of the the market of what is internet traffic. They are more than 1/3 of all internet traffic on a daily basis. But Bitdefender determined through like a study that they did that 20% of all internet porn, 20% of all internet porn is going to children under the age of 10. 20% of the third largest traffic, which is greater than the combination of like Netflix, Amazon, and like ESPN or something all combined. So if you imagine how many people are looking up going to Amazon every day and Google and ESPN, and you take 20% of that, 20% of that is going to children under the age of 10. That should give you a strong indicator that it is huge.
Okay.
I
Thank you
am
for for your knowledge and research. You're amazing. And that is sickening. Absolutely.
You know what
Okay.
else is weird? I want to say this too. When you're young and you're watching porn, you're a young boy, let's just say you're 9, 10, the average age, right? And you're looking at young girls, because they always try to, make porn stars look as young as possible. They might be 18 barely, but they make them look 12. There's disgusting producers out there who have been in documentaries that would literally make you throw up at the things they say and how they want to portray young girls. Anyway, so they're looking like they're 12. They're looking like they're the same age as these boys, right? So here's the weird thing. You're young and your sexual palette is being set to these young girls at a young age. And you grow, like you mature, but your taste still stays back there with these 12-year-olds, and it's not weird to you at the time when you're 12 and you're looking. I mean, it is weird. Like, let's be honest. Like I said, this is an opening and a flowering of sexual development that shouldn't be happening. But it doesn't maybe seem that weird that these are the girls that are your age. What's really weird is that you then become the 40-year-old whose sexual template really appreciates the 12-year-old looking girls. And it's like a cycle that just won't stop. That is so disturbing to me.
Exactly. And we've talked about that before, how the trend is, and I guess it's always been since porn, is this prepubescent, shaved, youthful. And that is like, we wonder why women and young girls, are shaving their entire bodies and all these other things. Hello, that's why, because we're supposed to look 12, right? Or
The
15 or whatever it is.
infantilization of women.
Yes. Yes.
We are so grateful for your honesty, because there are not a lot of girls who even admit to looking at porn, but your honesty and your bravery is just so refreshing and so going to help so many people. So if you had a 12-year-old sister, what would you say to her?
Gosh, I mean, this is very easy for me to visualize. I have a 10-year-old sister, so it's kind of within the same realm. I want her to understand that all of these wrong feelings that she's feeling, or all the things that seem unnatural to her as she's going through puberty, that it's not wrong. And she shouldn't feel guilty from it, because there is a lot of guilt and shame that comes with it, and wanting, being curious and wanting answers. And I also just want her to know that she could come to me as a trusted adult for questions about her curiosity. I remember being around her age and not feeling like I could go to my mom on these topics. And, I wouldn't be surprised if she felt the same way. I just hope that she could feel comfortable with me. And I want her to know that I'm a resource she can use, without explicitly saying, like, hey, you might be sexually curious, come talk to me.
Shame, I think, is the biggest thing that drives us from sharing these stories with our parents. And I think parents have to understand that there's so many ways that kids can be exposed to pornography. And one, ask them. A lot of times kids are exposed because someone with a really malevolent agenda with doing something with them has exposed them to it. Two, there's so many ways that they can get exposed, even if it's not someone older intending to like groom them. But three, try to remove shame and just remove your shock. You can later on talk to someone, you can sort of process through, but if your child has the temerity to show up in front of you and tell you that they're struggling with something, the thing that you can do that is the most helpful is to remove shame, remove big responses, and just hear them and say, I may not have the answers right now. I don't know how to help you in this moment, but I am determined to get back to you and help you with this. Shez, you might say something different, but I feel like that, Anne, would that have helped to know that you had somebody who wouldn't respond in judgment or anger or their own fear?
Yeah, definitely. Me and my sister grew up in, we kind of function as like a Southern traditional family where, you shouldn't bring up any taboo topics, especially when you're younger. I think my mother wouldn't be opposed to giving my sister or I that kind of advice in private. And I discovered that later as I grew up. But, you know, being 9 or 10 years old and getting curious, it felt like I was going against what my parents said, like I was breaking some kind of rule to be curious and have these questions, because if something explicit comes on TV, you turn it off. If someone says the word sex, you block the child's ear. And it's all like the atmosphere around it is shameful. And so I felt shameful trying to bring it up.
You know what? That is a great point. Actually, it's incumbent upon us as adults to make an environment where our children do feel safe to say these things. Realize that they are not going to there is a tsunami of sexually explicit and sexual innuendos coming at your child every day. And if you don't create a space where your child feels safe and not shamed for coming to you, that's something that parents really have to work on. Like, you have to say, hey, listen, I just want you to know there's so much out in the world that's crazy. And when I was young, I felt like I didn't have anyone to talk to. And I just want you to know I am a safe place where you will not get judgment. And I will try to help you to the best of my ability with anything that you need to talk about. You don't even have to say it's sexual.
What that calls for parents is to really work on their own shit. Work on your own hangups, stuff. If you can't say the word sex, or if you can't even fathom that this is happening to our youth today, and that's what does happen, or you can't fathom that depression and anxiety and all these other things happen, then by the time you do realize it, it's too late, because there's a problem. And that's what I see. I see things when it's too late. It's not too late, but when it's a problem. So I feel like it's a call to action to really get your stuff together so that you can be that open, honest, willing space for kids. And that takes a lot. That takes work on your own stuff. So it's like, start here first, but yes, be real and be realistic. The other thing about shame is you came to us and said, I want to talk about this. Something in your process and your development brought you to a place where you were willing to talk about something that, is potentially one of the harder things to maybe talk about. And you openly were like, I want to go here. What that is being willing to be empowered with your voice, willing to own your shit, willing to say, yes, I did this and it's okay, or I'm still doing it and I'm working things out, or whatever it is, but to really not let that stop you. And so I really want to honor you for being such a strong, empowered woman, because that's helping the world. Like, you're not just helping yourself and your little sister, you're really helping other people beyond that. And you came right up to us and said, I really want to talk about this. So I feel like that's the call to action that's super important, that we all become that. That nothing is off the table anymore, because otherwise, like you said, it's a barrage of stuff. So it's there anyway, but nothing is off the table. Let's just go and talk about it and have an open space and an open heart.
Thank you so much
Okay.
for your kind words. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for this conversation. So needed, so amazing. Yeah. Thank you for your bravery.
Thank you guys so much for, giving me this platform. It's a topic that, I've obviously dealt with for a long time now, and I'm glad that I finally get to use my thoughts for something productive, I hope.
Absolutely.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you guys.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of 7 on Sundays.
The 7 on Sundays podcast represents the opinions of Dr. Shez Levy and Stephanie Boy based on our experience. It also shares the stories, behaviors, and opinions of our guests that we do not necessarily condone or view as healthy. 7 on Sundays is an open forum to discuss what is happening with our listening audience. Some names and details of our guest stories have been changed to protect their anonymity. This podcast is not a substitute for mental health treatment. If you are in crisis and in need of mental health support, please call 988, the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. It is free and confidential.
Join the conversation and connect with us through our website, 7onsundays.com. That's the number 7onsundays.com. We encourage everyone to do their own research. Thank you and be well.